Patidjalal is an Indonesian diplomat, academic, and author. He served as a presidential spokesperson and foreign policy advisor from 2004 to 2010, Indonesia's ambassador to the US from 2010 to 2013, and vice minister for foreign affairs in 2014. He founded Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, FPCI, now the country's largest foreign policy network. A best-selling author, he has also written 11 books, including Harus Bisa. He is also known for his interfaith initiative, the 1000 Abrahamic Circle. Dr. Patidjalal holds a PhD from LSE and has received Indonesia's highest state honors. Edit and Pak Dino, the stage is yours.
Of Indonesia. Thank you for inviting me here, and thank you for hosting this wonderful event. And then I would also like to thank Ambassador Jalal for having me here to moderate this excellent conversation. I know there's going to be a lot of questions out in the audience, so as a moderator though, I'm going to start with a few questions of my own. We might be sharing the microphone if that doesn't work, but thank you for, we got it? Okay. Thank you for producing this documentary, which I think really captures an important piece of Indonesia's history, and I think one that hasn't been told and shown to audiences. And I think one of the first things that popped out to me when watching this was, where did Aceh and the conflict fit in everyday Indonesia? How did people outside of Aceh view this conflict?
Indonesians are obsessed with national unity since we declared independence in 1945, and our sense of nationalism was always undermined by the various separatist movements that we had throughout Indonesia in different decades. And Aceh was a persistent one. And a sense of security about our nationalism can only be ensured if the Aceh conflict was resolved. And to be honest, for many of us, we really thought that Aceh was the impossible conflict to resolve. I really thought that until I died, that Aceh conflict still would not be resolved. That's how serious it is. Because the violence, the war was carried through generations. And there was so much hatred between the two sides. They wanted to annihilate each other. And that's why for Indonesia's national security, national unity, Aceh was an important part of our psyche at that time.
So you mentioned that this has gone through generations, and I think even looking at the time period that this documentary covered, it also showed so much of what Indonesia went through, the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the tsunami, the fall of Suharto, and the emergence of democracy. But in the backdrop that you had this conflict, and you said maybe not in your lifetime would you see this, we saw throughout the documentary that there always seemed to be a challenge that could possibly derail the negotiations. How did it keep going? How were we able to finally reach success in 2005?
The key was being persistent about it, right? And even though we had different political ups and downs, the belief that we have to stay the course with the Aceh peace process was very important. And the idea, I think the critical turning point was what you saw in the film, was that when we realized we cannot solve this through military means. And I think this is important because, in Sri Lanka, they had a similar war, and it was resolved 100% by military victory, right? So there were people who thought, yes, we can force our way to military victory in Aceh. So that view was strongly held, particularly by the military. But I'm convinced now. I wasn't convinced back then, but convinced now that if we had persisted with that course, there would be no peace in Aceh today, because you could not annihilate these people, right? And if you did, then it would be a lot of bloodbath, and I don't think we could have successfully done it. So that's why the strategic turning point was when we realized it had to be a political solution, and the only way that could happen was to have two sides compromising, which means Indonesia had to give something away, and the Acehnese, the GAM, had to give something away, and we reached a compromise, a middle point, which was the political solution, and it would be the permanent political solution to the conflict.
So that word compromise, I think one of the scenes, definitely for me, but maybe for other people here, was when the example of drinking Earl Grey tea in the upstairs room and trying on someone else's shoes. To get to that compromise, how did the government and the military and vice versa, was there an attempt to understand one another's perspectives?
Yeah, so this is an important point. I'm a political scientist by education, and when you're involved in conflict, the instinct is, I have to defeat you, and if I have to eliminate you, then I'll do it. In many conflicts around the world, that's the logic. And that process, because it lasted 30 years, it dehumanized the other person, right? It's okay for me to kill you because that's the dogmatic thing, the ideological thing. That's for the nation, right? There was a point, again, I can't pinpoint where that was, but sometime throughout the 5 rounds of negotiations, both sides came to know one another as human beings, and both sides saw there was a common interest in ending the conflict. I'm not going to win it all, and the other side say, I'm not going to win it all. And most importantly, we saw the humanity in one another. This concept of humanity, we take it for granted, but humanity means, look, I'm a human being and you're a human being as much as I am, right? When a member of your family is killed or is hurt, you will feel the pain just like I would, right? So that ability to empathize, to put myself in your shoes and yours in my shoes, is very important turning point, right? So this is why I think, and I do believe this, Aaron, I think in any conflict situations, if the two sides start thinking to dehumanize the other person, that's when the psychology of the conflict would begin to change. And this is what happened then, And to be honest, we played this film in Jakarta, the first premiere. And then we invited Yusuf Kala, and we invited Malik Mahmud, the GAM leaders, both sides. And after that, they were all hugging, they were all crying, yeah? And that's when I realized that, look, these guys were able to overcome their conflict and rediscover their interhuman, the human connections. So that's what I think was quite special about the experience. Yeah. But by the way, anyone Acehnese?
But I think that's an important point that you make, and I really want to emphasize that, and trying to find the humanity in people, and not to politicize this or anything, but this is what we've seen even in U.S. history, where Martin Luther King would say, "I am a man," and it's just recognizing someone as a human being and what the importance of that is. Once you start labeling someone else as the other or a terrorist or some other label, it is almost impossible to sort of regain that humanity. So to see that come out, and we were talking about crying in this, I started watching this on a plane, and I don't know if you've read these articles where it like heightens your emotion when you're flying. I was laughing, I was bawling. I mean, I think the flight attendant had to check on me at some point, but I felt every emotion in this film. I want to look just to the role of the military in this. You were talking about the changing of your opinion of a military solution, but really it was the political dialogue and the peace negotiation. How did the military change their role and their viewpoints as this went on?
It's a very good question. Of all the political actors on the Indonesian side, on the Indonesian government side, the military was the strongest stakeholder because they were on the field, they were losing men, and they were the ones fighting on the front line. So they tend to take very hardline position. And that position was destroy them, right? They killed us, so we gotta kill 10 of them, right? For everyone that was killed. So that was a very hard position. And I was President Yudhoyono's spokesman, so I was next to him the whole time. And his thought was, look, we got to make sure if we agree things at this level, the military has to be on board. And we know there are so many episodes in history, in our history and other nations' history, where if the military did not go along with the political decisions at the top, then there would be no peace, right? So the president made sure that the commander, the armed forces chief, which was his man, and the Artono Sutarto, was kept, right? I think he was supposed to be retired at some point, but he said, no, I want you there, and I want you to go to the field and talk to every level of military. They gotta support this, right? Because at that time, this was not a popular one. They were calling the government, traitors or whatever, why do you negotiate with these people, with these rebels and so on. But in the end, the military did fall in line, and it helped that this peace process went so fast, right? 5 rounds, right? From January until August. And in the end, the military towed the line, and things moved so fast, and the transition to the political solution were well done, were carried on smoothly. And it helped also that there were monitoring missions, right? There was the EU, which was assuring to GAM, because GAM leadership was in Europe, but there was ASEAN monitoring missions, which was assuring to our military, right? So both combinations worked quite well.
Was a bit of a concerning statement that was made by the family that said, the younger people, they don't remember the fighting, they might be interested in fighting again, that they don't recognize how hard it was to achieve peace and what it was like during the conflict. Do you see changing attitudes among the younger generation, and how does Indonesia teach or help younger generations understand how important this was?
Yeah, well, thanks, Erin, for this question. First, this goes straight into the heart of why I produced this film. I was actually in Japan, and then you know what I realized? I don't know if you know this. A lot of Japanese young people did not know that they fought a war against the United States.
Oh God.
You know that? They were so just busy with hip hop or whatever, pop culture and so on, and they forget. Yeah. And a lot of Acehnese that are in their teens would not know that the absence of war, the peace that they have, the democracy they have, was actually not there before, right? And when we showed this film in Aceh just recently, a lot of young people, they were blown away. They said, oh, is this what happened, before we were born? So it's important for young people to understand that peace was earned, right? Conflict was resolved really through a very difficult process. And as an Indonesian and as a former diplomat, I believe this is one of the best things that we had ever done. I mean, we did many things in terms of conflict resolutions, but I think this was inspiring not just for present and future generations, but also for many countries around the world to show that no matter how difficult the conflict is, and no matter how much hatred you have for one another, you could always find a solution. And I seriously don't think it would happen if it was not for the tsunami. And I think without the tsunami, it would be the whole things that you saw would continue until today.
I mean, it's hard to say, well, thank goodness for the tsunami, because it was so devastating, but I mean, it did really, I think the film made clear what the role of that devastating issue was, and that actually, I'm taking all the questions, but don't worry, I'll turn to you.
No, that's a great question.
But the role of international organizations, you talk about the AMM, but also the Quad, as we know it today, was created that India, Australia, Japan, and the United States coming together, almost like the Avengers, coming together to deliver aid. What role do you think that the international organizations and governments played? And I did notice only one European won the Nobel Prize and not any of the other negotiators, but that's just me. So.
Well, very important, because before, the GAM leadership had this mindset that we could fight Indonesia and we could do whatever we wanted and we would not get any reprisals from our host government or any international, any other foreign governments. So that was their mindset in Malaysia, in Sweden, and so on. But this time, we really pressed hard. And we gave them the impression that, look, if you don't agree to a compromised political solution, you're not going to be welcome in Malaysia or in other places in Sweden. And so we actually went to Sweden, went to Malaysian government and told them, look, this is very important to us and we're friends. So you gotta help us press GAM to move their position. And I think, alhamdulillah, that worked.
So my final question is, I've worked on Myanmar issues for quite a long time. And in fact, I started right before Cyclone Nargis, so was also initiated with a terrible natural disaster. Indonesia has been held up as a model for Myanmar to follow, both in its political transition in 2010, now we have another military government, but you also have multiple conflicts. Is there a lesson or some way that Indonesia can provide the Aceh example to a country like Myanmar? Can there be other examples for other countries that are going through a conflict?
Well, I think from this story, one of the important lessons was every peace deal usually required a catalyst, something out of the ordinary that happened, interjected into the process and changed the dynamics. And in this case, it was the tsunami. But on top of that, there was another factor, which is what I would say, wise statesmanship on both sides, on the Indonesian side and on the GAM side, right? And so in Indonesia, that worked. You had the tsunami and you had wise leaders among the combatants. In Myanmar, you had that in the Nargis. But somehow, and they've had recent earthquakes, yeah.
Right.
But that second factor, is it there or not? Whether or not they had the right leadership on both sides that would change the dynamics of the conflict. And unfortunately, I think it did not. Maybe the impact wasn't serious enough, but in my view, the impact of tsunami in Aceh was similar to the impact of the Nargis hurricane in Myanmar.
Right.
Yeah, but that second factor was there.
Yeah.
Was not there yet.
Audience, my reign of questions.
My highest appreciation to our diplomats and team for this successful peace negotiation, and also to you for producing this very enlightening, how do you say, rich with detail documentary. So many things I learned from the documentary, and that is why my first question is, will it be like available to the general public? Like, I don't know, in YouTube or Netflix, because I really want my children to also watch it. I have 2 children, not here, one in Paris and one in Jakarta now. I really want them to have opportunity to watch it too. That's the first question. My second question is,
The first question, actually, my aim is for this film to be watched and studied in all universities throughout Indonesia, yeah, by campus, you know, and they would look at it. You know why? Because students now, they don't read books anymore. They watch YouTube and they watch TV, right? Not even TV, mostly digital screen on their phone, yeah, or tablet. So that's the ultimate aim. But before that, we want to submit this film to international film festivals in Europe, in Korea, and in the United States. If you have any suggestion, any friends that want to take this film, please.
Netflix, maybe.
Okay. yes, thank you. So but we have to go through this first, and this is why this is an exclusive screening before we actually go to film festivals. And secondly, making other documentaries. First, I have to tell you this was painful to make. Why? Because my principle was a difficult one. I was a government official, right, for 30 years, but I cannot make this film a propaganda, right? I have to be honest. And if you see these films, if you're in the military, you would not like this, right? There was honesty that was important, but that honesty was important for the credibility and independence of this film, right? So it was a painful thing. If I made one on East Timor, it would be even much more painful, as you know. But to be honest, we're considering it, right? Why? Because there's happy ending in East Timor. Now there's reconciliation and there's peace and so on. Yeah. So we are actually considering it. But this took 2 years. From the idea, I came up with this in the coffee shop until actual film screening in Jakarta. It took 2 years, a long time. So if anything I would do next, it would be on East Timor. But again, the principle of honesty is critical to this, right? And I know some people may not be happy. Why did you show this? Why did you show this? But that's what a documentary is all about. You know. And what was the third one?
Women and
Oh, you're absolutely right. We needed more women in it. The GAM side had women. Our side did not have any women. And as you saw the I forget her name, the chief, that was in the movie, in the GAM delegation. She was the most spirited, but also she was the most committed to peace. And she had actually families that were shot on the ground. Yeah. But definitely, the reason why peace held up even until today, part of it is that the women in Aceh are supportive of the peace deal. So good answer. You know, I'm not rich, obviously, but I asked my mother to pay for this. Yeah, so she did. In Aceh, this was actually not in the film, but in Aceh, when we wanted to resolve it after the tsunami, we went to the military commanders. We sent envoys to the military commanders of GAM on the ground. And then they said to us, to the government, that look, we want peace too, but we will not make any decision because we have our political leadership. If our political leadership said yes, then we go. If they said no, then we fight. So this is why we went to their political leadership in Sweden and Malaysia in order to establish peace. There was that very disciplined, structured military command, military and political command. Papua does not have that, right? So that's one big difference, right? And again, I'm not an expert on Papua, but the ingredients for a solution should be more or less there to consider. The most important is no human rights violation. You understand, right? So the situation in Papua will only be improved if we can permanently guarantee that there is no human rights violations as we deal with the conflict. You know, this is part of the reason how East Timor became uncontrollable for us. The resistance became stronger because the human rights factor was never resolved, right? In fact, at some point it kept getting worse. You know, the Dili shooting, 200 people were shot in Santa Cruz Cemetery, and so on and so on. So the human rights dimension has to be addressed. And secondly, addressing the political and economic grievances, right? In Aceh, they had some formula, right? Because in Aceh, as Yusuf Kala said, economic grievances, the sense of economic injustice was very strong, and that was resolved, right? In Papua, the sense of economic injustice needs to be addressed, and also political grievance that also needs to be addressed. But exactly how are honest about their history. You know, if there were bad moments, if there were, you know, just things that may not feel good, they tell it as it is, right? And in fact, they like to study what went wrong for you know, present and future generations to understand. I mean, I went to Pentagon once. I don't know if you've been to Pentagon, but every wall, right, is about the war that happened here, and this is what happened, this is what went right, or this is what went wrong. You know, it was every battle was on the floors, sorry, on the walls of Pentagon, right? In our culture, it's a bit different, as you know, right? We don't like to talk about dark things, right? And then if we did, they would say, what, you know, why do you talk like that, you know, about our past, you know? But the honest approach is the best way for us to not repeat the same mistakes, right? So I really think our young people should always have this sense of historicism, right? But more importantly, we should always also try to review our historical understanding of things to make sure that the right one, right? Because a lot of times when you write history books, it's for political convenience, right? There's a lot, not just in Indonesia, but in other countries as well. So, yeah, that's my message to you.
Yeah, history is written by the victors, but I think, you know, that your comments there, I think also speak to the fragility of democracy, of peace, of growing here. The U.S. has been generally pretty good about acknowledging the terrible things that we've done. We just passed the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War, or for the Vietnamese, the American War. And certainly have been very honest about that, although we're starting to kind of turn the tide to cover up all those mistakes that we've made. So, I mean, it really, trying to shine a light on these things, I think is incredibly important. Liars, I think constant vigilance, make mistakes, but they can last forever on these things. I think his third question was on, do you have plans for another documentary? Timor got brought up, but any other thoughts? Maybe on internet?
The closest one would be on Timor, because I was personally involved in that, so I have some connection with that, yeah. But again, I feel bad borrowing money from my mom again.
Well, I'm sure she's very proud of you, and this went really well. Moms are great that way. And I think we have time for one more question. I saw a hand back there. Yep, thank
They
you.
have their own self-government. Our biggest mistakes was to think that all you need to do was throw money at a problem and the problem would be solved, right? And this was not the case, right? We spent a lot of money, but the resistance towards Indonesia was only getting stronger, partly because of the human rights situation and so on. But at the same time, I also believe in any conflict situation, economic strategy can be a powerful tool for political solution, right? Somebody asked about Papua earlier, right? And I do agree that whatever that formula for permanent peace in Papua, you gotta find the right economic strategy to not marginalize the people, but empower the people so they can get a sense of economic justice, right? If you don't mind me choosing the case of the United States, Hawaii was not part of the United States, and then it became part of the United States, right? And there was some local opposition to it because of the way Hawaii became part of the United States, right? But you go to Hawaii now, I think there was you may hear very minuscule, independence talk, but Hawaii is perfectly part of the United States, and people are happy. Why? Because economically, economically it was such that it benefited the people of Hawaii, and over time they developed their identity as Americans, right? In other words, the economic development in Hawaii did not marginalize or oppress the Hawaiians, right? Same thing with Alaska, right? There was some, I think, independence movement in Alaska, right? But what happened? They found a formula. I don't want to get into the details of this formula, but basically, they came up with economic package whereby every Alaskan would feel the benefit. They would get a check from the natural resources production. Again, I don't know the details of it, but in Alaska, the economic strategy empowered the people, right? And that again developed a sense of identity whereby they maintain their Alaskan identity, but also they felt that they are Americans, right? So again, what this proves is that the theory that you need to have an economic strategy that empowers the people rather than marginalize them, and this leads to the political outcome that would be